are at home, practicing sort of semi-social isolation. And we thought, as we did tweet a couple of days ago, we thought that we would start doing a weekly CRICKETher social isolation vodcast. Just because we've got time on our hands. We think most of you have probably got a bit more time on your hands, and it will be nice to come together as a women's cricket community every week and sort of share things and as a bit of entertainment as well. So we flew back from Australia on Tuesday morning, didn't we, Sid?
It's hard to remember what day it was, but did we arrive back on Tuesday or on Wednesday?
We arrived back on Tuesday morning, 6 a.m. into Heathrow. Okay. So, yeah.
Yeah, and we arrived back to a little bit of a different country to the one we left. And it felt a little bit different to Australia, didn't it? I think that it was really interesting coming back from Australia, where there was definitely a much less sense of worry, to be honest. Rightly or wrongly, Australia didn't seem to have quite woken up to things in the way that England has done now.
Yeah, so we've been here and we have been kind of both working from home and will be for the foreseeable future. So that's us. What have you been up to? Tell us what you've been up to during your enforced social distancing / social isolation. We'd love to hear from you. We thought that we'd kind of kickstart things this week with a review of the T20 World Cup, which does already feel like quite a long time ago because quite a lot has happened since then. But the final was actually 2 weeks ago today. Can you believe that, Sid?
No, it does seem like a lot longer, doesn't it? It seems like it feels like it was half a world away, Raf.
Oh, was that meant to be a joke?
It was.
Ha 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 ha! Yeah.
I'll insert a laughter track in the edit.
Good idea. So we never did a sort of post-tournament video, so we're doing one now. So overall thoughts on the tournament? Maybe I'll kick us off. So this might be a bit controversial because I've read quite a bit of stuff saying, well, Australia won. And they absolutely walked all over India in the final, and therefore we should be concerned about this kind of gap that's emerging between a very dominant Australia and the rest of the women's cricket world, basically. But I kind of feel like I actually took the opposite away from this tournament. I feel like, given the resources that they've got available to them, Australia should actually have been a lot more dominant than they were, and they really weren't particularly convincing for most of the group stages. I think the only really convincing win that they had was against Bangladesh, which is what you would expect. But they weren't, obviously they lost that opening match to India, which they really should have won. They were chasing a very low total. And they then weren't massively convincing against Sri Lanka, against New Zealand, and even in the semi-final against South Africa, really, I feel like they weren't particularly dominant in that match. So I actually think that quite a few teams this tournament gave them a run for their money, and I was really happy and excited to see that because it felt like, it wasn't all about Australia this tournament.
Yeah, it certainly is. Obviously, the memory that everyone's going to have is of the final and how dominant they were in the final. And it's true that was definitely, they saved the best for last in that game. And we'll talk a bit more about the final later, obviously. But I sort of also feel that, nonetheless, despite the fact that it looked like, there were a number of close games, New Zealand ran them reasonably close, South Africa ran them reasonably close, that those games weren't actually kind of as close as they felt, that Australia looked to be in control of those games nonetheless. So, I'm not sure that the tournament for me really does abolish the notion that Australia are streets ahead. But there certainly is something important to be said about the fact that probably they will feel that in the tournament overall they didn't perform as well as they would have wanted. And it's definitely the case that the resources available to them do dwarfed those available to anybody else, including England. It was actually, there was an interesting moment for me during the tri-series in terms of thinking about the resources available to teams when Elise Villani was on commentary and was talking about the approach of the Indians to fielding and saying that the Indians weren't doing everything that they could to adjust the field to particular batsmen. And I think that what Elise Villani potentially was missing there was that even India and England as well don't really have the resources to, in terms of research and data in order to be able to, make those kinds of choices. They have, the coaches to advise them, and they have limited access to, data and analytics, but not in the way that Australia do. Only Australia have serious access to that stuff. Australia's backroom team is twice the size of anybody else's, and that does give them a degree of privilege, which means that they should be performing really well in these tournaments. And the point that you make that is definitely true, that in terms of the way they perform compared to those resources they've got access to is perhaps going to be slightly disappointing to them. But nonetheless, when it came to it, they still were the team that came out with all those wins. If you're winning those games, then at the end of the day, that's all that anybody's going to remember if you won them. It doesn't really matter if you won them by 3 balls because you were in control and you didn't panic. You still won the game.
Well, I think what I'm going to remember is that in any alternative team of the tournament, the SCG groundsman should be number 1 on the team sheet, because really that's an absolute miracle that they got that match in. And I still think that potentially if it had been any other team, they wouldn't have been under so much pressure to get that semi-final on, and it might well not have happened. But
yeah, there was an interesting moment in the innings break of when it had started raining, and it kind of sort of stops, and then it looked to be threatening to start again, and the groundsman told his staff to drive the covers back on, and the covers started to come on, tractor started to pull them, and then someone else ran over. I don't know who the someone else was. It wasn't someone directly from Team Australia. It wasn't like Meg Lanning herself had gone over and done this, but somebody ran over and literally stood in front of the tractor and said, "No, guys, go back. Don't do this." Would they have done that?
If it had been England-India's game, no.
Or even if Australia had been the one in pole position, the one that would have won the match, by default if it hadn't been completed. So.
Yeah. Well, it was Australia's tournament at the end of the day. So, and they won, and they were worthy winners in the final. I just think that from my perspective, I expected a bit more of a dominant performance from them, I think, in the group stages, and I was pleasantly surprised. Now, Sid, thinking about overall takeaways from this tournament, your favourite team, South Africa, actually were probably like a smidgen away from getting to their first final of a global tournament. So that's really cool, isn't it?
Yeah, South Africa definitely. I mean, they'll blow hot and cold on the same tour as they did when they visited New Zealand just before the tournament. They win one series, lose the next series, win one series, lose the next series. But I think that South Africa, are going to be pleased with where things are going. They're not, unlike some teams, horrendously dependent upon a load of ageing players. You can contrast them with New Zealand in that sense. New Zealand remain horrendously dependent upon Sophie Devine and Susie Bates. And that's probably not a great place for them to be in. Whereas South Africa are not dependent upon just a couple of older players. Their older players are actually slightly younger. They've still got some, there's still plenty more gas left in the tank for people like Dane van Niekerk and Marizanne Kapp. And I think there was a very positive tournament for South Africa. And I hope that they've come away feeling that, they've put themselves in a position where they've hopefully going to really stamp themselves as part of those top teams, because it does feel with South Africa that 1 minute they're one of the top teams in the world and the next minute they're down the bottom as one of the bottom teams. And what they need to do is get the consistency. But by bringing in younger players and giving younger players the opportunity and the time to come good, then hopefully they're going to do that and be one of those top sides that are going to be challenging and exciting us all, and giving us all great games of cricket over the next few years. Because that was what it comes down to about South Africa's match with England, right? That England lost that match, and as an England fan, you look at that and say, well, that was disappointing. But on the other hand, it was a good game of cricket. It was one of the better games of cricket in the tournament. And had England smashed South Africa that day, and South Africa had been the South Africa that they've been at some other tournaments, like in the Caribbean in 2018, then as England fans we'd have been delighted. But on the other hand, it wouldn't really have been as good for cricket.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. I guess we might be a bit more disappointed with the way that, say, the West Indies performed this tournament. We were kind of talking about this before, weren't we? And in terms of, I was just thinking about what you were saying about the inconsistency of South Africa. Well, the West Indies have kind of sort of gone, their trajectory in international cricket over the last, say, 5 years has been whoa, and then maybe like a little up, because they did get to the semi-finals of the last World T20, but it all seems to have gone crashing back down since then. They were very uncompetitive against England in our last summer, and really it's difficult to find many positives for them from this tournament.
Yeah, they're in some ways in the position the opposite position to South Africa, that they're definitely really struggling, and it's almost there's not, the ups are much less frequent than the downs for them at the moment. I think it says a lot that the player they brought in for this tournament, their young blood as it were, was actually a 30-year-old who'd made her debut more than 10 years ago, Leanne Kirby. That was their regardless of how she performed, if your answer to your problems is to bring in a 32-year-old that played a couple of games, in 2008 and then haven't played since, then you're probably not in a great place. They had a golden generation.
Wrong. It shows that something's going wrong domestically, doesn't it?
Well, they had a golden generation. Anisa Mohammed at her peak and Stephanie Taylor and Deandra Dottin. That was the core of a team that could have really set a mark on world cricket, and they did win a World Cup. Let's not take that away from them. That when all these players retire, they'll have that medal in the back of their cabinets. That it looks like that some of those great New Zealand players probably won't have unless they can pull it out of the bag at home themselves next year. But overall, they look to be struggling as a team, right, Raf?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that, absolutely. I think it does seem that when one small thing goes wrong for them, and that could be quite near the start of a match, they slump, and when they're in the field, it's very visible, and that that Stephanie Taylor as captain kind of finds it difficult to revive that sense of kind of being a team, really. It feels like, Hayley Matthews has some great moments of individualism in the field, and that was a particular example of kind of athleticism that you were talking about, where she took that catch.
Yeah, she's taken some great catches, she's done some great fielding. I saw a piece of great fielding in one of the games, I can't remember which one offhand now, but where she picked up a bouncing ball on the boundary and threw it in one movement, and it had the grace of a ballerina, and the natural athleticism to do that is God given to 1 in 100 million people. So she's obviously got something, but on the other hand, she's never quite kind of fulfilled that natural potential, has she?
Yeah, well, she obviously had that great innings in the 2016 World T20 final against Australia, which was absolutely fantastic. But since then, it's not been great for her in terms of the numbers. So I suppose what I was trying to say was that actually you can have moments of brilliance, and you can have kind of individual innings that are brilliant. But unless you come together as a team, then you're not really going to win very often. So let's hope that that this is the start of some kind of renaissance for the West Indies, that they can bring themselves together, and I think it really partly relies on the cricket board putting some more resources into the team ultimately. Okay, let's move on from that, because that's a little bit of a downer. Let's think about that amazing moment at the MCG just 2 weeks ago, when 86,000 people crowded in for this final of Australia against India. Just amazing to be there, wasn't it, Sid?
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? I mean, there were doubts about whether they could pull it off, running right to the last moment, and they certainly still sold some tickets on the door. But when I arrived at the ground and there were people milling around from quite early on, and then I went out to have a wander around about an hour or so before play started, and thinking that I'd be able to wander around for 10 minutes and then walk back in. And it's like, oh no, you're not just walking back in. You don't just walk into the MCG apparently, as the meme goes, because there were just so many people there at that point that it was impossible to move. And then when they were all in there, and Katy Perry came out and gave her performance, and that really turned it into an event. I've been definitely one of the skeptics about Katy Perry, as I guess my concern was that Katy Perry overshadows everything else, because she is such a kind of global star. But it didn't overshadow it particularly for me. That I think that Katy Perry gave a great performance, and it kind of got everyone excited. It got everyone up for the game of cricket.
It was a compliment, wasn't it? It complemented the cricket rather than overshadowing it. It was a kind of like, right, this is what we're seeing. It's something really empowering for International Women's Day. The dancing cricket bats and the, some of the slightly sillier aspects of it. But ultimately it was about empowerment, and that's kind of what women's cricket is about, really. I think that's what I've argued in my book, anyway. So there you go.
Alyssa Healy took that on, and Alyssa Healy gave everyone a performance to remember as well. And for everyone that was there that day, all those 86,000 people, they're not just going to remember Katy Perry. They might remember Katy Perry, of course they will, because that was great. But so was Alyssa Healy. They're going to remember Katy Perry, and they're going to remember Alyssa Healy, who quite literally knocked it out the park. The game kind of, obviously, once India lost a couple of early wickets, the game kind of went
fizzled
down.
Out a bit.
Fizzled out.
That was a bit of a shame that it wasn't a more competitive.
It was.
Spectacle,
at one point the crowd started doing Mexican waves, which is actually never a good sign.
Bored.
But it was still an absolutely fantastic thing to be part of, and I feel really privileged that we were able to be there. It was awesome.
And I think one of the really important aspects of it was that those were paid spectators, weren't they? So if you compare it with the 97 World Cup, which was the previous record for women's cricket, anything kind of, estimates of anywhere upward of 80,000, wasn't it? That actually most of those people were kind of being bussed in, and they weren't paying spectators in the way that crowd at the G 2 weeks ago. They wanted to be there.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk leading up to the final about the previous year's AFL women's final, where they'd had 50,000 people at the Adelaide Oval, and there was talk, can cricket match that, because domestically cricket hadn't come anywhere near. But at the end of the day, they matched that and more than surpassed it. And that crowd of 50,000 at the Adelaide Oval, they were free. There were no charges for those. Whereas this was 86,000 people, most of whom had paid to be there.
Yeah.
They hadn't paid an awful lot in most cases. The children's tickets were like $5, and the men's adults tickets started at $10 and were mostly sold for around $20, I believe. So. But they still paid real money, and I think that what's also really important is that's a marker for what women's cricket can achieve. And
is that the new normal then for women's cricket? Or we're going to be seeing 86,000 at the final of the 2021 World Cup in New Zealand?
Well, no, yeah.
I don't even know what the capacity of the ground for the final is. It probably isn't anything like that.
20,000 or something, probably.
Yeah.
But no, of course not. But all of those people that were there will attend a cricket match, in the future, and I think what it does is kind of legitimises the support and solidifies the support. It's the same that we had in England, that we had 27,000 at Lords or whatever it exactly was for the 2017 World Cup final. Did we get 27,000 for any of for the KSL final the year afterwards? Well, no, of course we didn't. But it's given the sport a legitimacy that it didn't have before, and those kinds of numbers are important for that. We saw that with women's football, getting the first big crowds at Wembley for women's football in this country, was a starting point to getting bigger crowds for domestic matches, and we're now seeing that it's not uncommon now to get crowds of tens of thousands at domestic matches. So you have to kind of pace this a little bit. So I think it's really encouraging. I don't think we should get ahead of ourselves and think that we certainly can't be complacent. and everyone's going to need to build on it. But it's still a fantastic achievement for everybody involved, and fantastic for the game that all those people were there, and because they were Australian, mostly enjoyed their day.
Okay, yeah. So overall, then, what was your favourite moment or match of the World Cup?
Well, gosh, I mean, so many things stand out, don't they? But I really enjoy watching the Australia-India match. As an England fan, it's always nice to see Australia get beaten. Sorry, Australia. But come on, guys, you think the same about us, right?
That's true.
You can't deny it.
Works both ways.
But we watched that match actually in a bar in Perth.
Yeah.
And we were able to have a couple of beers and or a couple of ciders in your case, and just enjoy watching it on the television. In a crowded bar, which was kind of nice. It's not something that we get the chance to do very often. And I also really enjoyed the Australia match at Canberra for similar reasons, that we sat in the crowd and we had the kind of pressure was off. It's a massive privilege, obviously, to be in the press box and to be writing stuff and to be writing about the game. And I love that. I wouldn't want to give it up. But sometimes it's nice to kick back and know that you don't have to write anything and to be part of the crowd and just enjoy the cricket. Okay.
Are you going to ask me what my favourite moment was?
What was your favourite moment, Raf?
Okay. Well, again, this is not going to go down too well probably with our Australian fans or our Australian audience. But I quite enjoyed the moment in Australia's second group stage match against Sri Lanka after they'd lost to India, and then they were 10-3 against Sri Lanka. And there was a distinct ripple of nervousness in the press box amongst kind of Australian journalists and the tournament organisers, because really there was genuinely a fear that Australia were on the verge of getting knocked out of their own tournament before the semi-finals. And I just quite enjoyed the kind of 5 or 10 minutes of nerves there, because it really did kind of upset expectations, and that makes good cricket, doesn't it? It doesn't make good cricket for Australia to sail through to the final. So it's not just about me being a kind of England supporter who's anti-Australia. It was about kind of going, well, why should they have an automatic expectation or automatic right to get to the final? They shouldn't. And so it was kind of nice from that perspective.
Yeah, sport's nothing if it's not competitive, right?
Right.
If there's no competition, if there's no sense of danger, then sport just becomes, like a Bruce Willis movie where the action hero is going to win at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
And the great beauty of sport is that that it's always possible that the action hero, Alyssa Healy in this case, or Meg Lanning, doesn't actually come through at the end and does get defeated at the last minute.
Yeah, and I think looking back on the tournament, even Australia will admit that it was better for the tournament that they had a few kind of moments of nervousness and moments of danger like that than for them just to sail through. I mean, at the time, they probably wouldn't have said that, but anyway. We'd love to hear what your favourite moment or match of the tournament was, by the way, so do tweet us at CRICKETher, and yeah, let's share those moments, because it was definitely a memorable tournament, although maybe not from England's perspective, which we haven't really talked about. It kind of feels like from an England perspective, they won 3 matches that they were expected to win. They lost 1 match, which, fair enough, against South Africa, who are a good team, and then they didn't ever get the chance to show what they could do in the semi-final against India, and they kind of flew home very disappointed. I don't think this will be one that they'll be talking about for years. Do you, Sid?
No, it was a little bit flat in terms of England didn't, obviously the biggest crowds weren't at England's matches. I think the match against South Africa was probably the biggest crowd that England played, and it was the WACA was nothing like full. I guess that England will look back at this tournament obviously disappointed with what occurred in the semi-final, but I think that I wrote a piece saying that there were some positives for them to take out of it, and I think that there genuinely are. 2 of the best batsmen in the tournament were wearing England shirts. 2 of the best bowlers in the tournament were wearing England shirts. They only lost 1 game, which is the same number of games that Australia lost in actually winning the tournament. So and at the end of the day, this is sport as well, right? Somebody has to lose. For there to be winners, there has to be a loser, and this wasn't England's tournament. but I don't think they shamed themselves at all.
No.
I think that, you know, they put into the tournament, and yeah, it wasn't, you know, to be in terms of them walking away with medals or trophies, but, you know, it would have been a poorer tournament without them there, that's for sure.
Okay. Well, we're probably going to wrap up there. Thank you so much for all your suggestions so far for things we should cover in our Vodcast, by the way. We have been kind of paying attention and taking notes on everything that you've said, and we will be including those suggestions in future Vodcasts. So keep them coming at CRICKETher. Anything you want to say, anything you want to ask us, anything you think we should be talking about, we'd love to hear from you. And should we have a hashtag for that, Syd? Hashtag social isolation women's cricket.
It's a bit of a long hashtag.
I know. Well, if anyone wants to suggest a
hashtag, through this
hashtag,
bit, have we, Raf?
we haven't. No. If anyone wants to suggest a hashtag, then
hashtag
do.
the social isolation of women's cricket hashtag at womenscricket.com.hashtag.
All right. Also, we're going to have some exciting backgrounds, hopefully. What's our first background going to be, Syd?
I don't know. We'll give it a try.
Okay. Well, watch this space, literally. See you next week for the second of our social isolation CRICKETher podcasts. Bye for now. Stay safe and well.